real. Okay, it's not a tax dodge. It's not some sketchy thing by some unknown company from some unknown weird part of the world where you have no idea what's going to happen. This is a program of the government of this territory, and it's real, and it has very profound impact for the people who can make use of it. So, here we go. Legal tax reduction. Why Puerto Rico? Well, hundreds of years ago, this place was the crown jewel of the Spanish colonization effort in this part of the world because it has a natural deep water port, and it's right where the trade winds would bring the ships from Spain to the New World. So it was a haven for the Spanish and an easily defensible port. Subsequently, I think Chris can correct me, or Ken if I'm wrong, but the correct economic term is shit happened. And here we are 500 years later, and the place is again becoming a haven. And despite my vulgarity there, the reason for it is, in fact, the shit that's happened, and we've heard a lot about it today. Who here has come away from listening to our Puerto Rican speakers thinking this is a great, well-organized place, and has, smooth sailing ahead, no problems? Anybody want to raise their hand for that? No. The fact is that this place is so messed up that has created opportunities. There's a German finance minister joked with the U.S. administration, and he said, "Oh, we'll trade you Greece for Puerto Rico." And it would have been a good deal, actually. Compare the debts and all. But the bottom line is, people like to say Puerto Rico is bankrupt. Well, that's a confabulation. Puerto Rico is not bankrupt. The Puerto Rican government is bankrupt. And that's a really good thing in my view. It means they can't do all kinds of mean, nasty things on the Group W bench that they would otherwise do with all that money. So I'm glad they're bankrupt. But unlike Greece, they couldn't leave the Union. That was settled in 1865. And they couldn't go back to printing the drachma or something, or pesos. Oddly enough, people refer to dollars as pesos here. But they're really stuck. They couldn't print the money. They couldn't leave. They didn't have any money. Nobody would lend them any money. What are they going to do? So even the socialists here all said, well, maybe we'll try to get people with money to come here. Well, how do we do that? Well, we have to give them an incentive. A market concept. So sometimes even socialists can embrace market concepts, and they had no choice. They didn't want to do this. Nobody liked it, I think. But this is very real. They had no choice, and they created these laws, first enacted in 2012, I think. Act 20 and 22 are the principal ones. There are others. But this is a real deal. This is a real thing. So let's talk about this. That's why Puerto Rico. I also like to caution people, why not Puerto Rico? And in this particular crowd, my reasons why not maybe don't apply so much. Most libertarians, and certainly Liberty International libertarians, they've traveled a lot. They're not scared by other languages or broken pavements or third world grunge as much as the average American from Main Street, Iowa would be. But it is important to understand that this is not Main Street, Iowa. It is part of the United States, but it is different. The culture is different. Just for example, my name is Lobo Tiggre, but there's Spanish common law here. So I go to get a mortgage, and I can't just say my name is Lobo Tiggre. I have to have my mother's last name on the documents, because that's part of Spanish common law. So in Puerto Rico only, I am Lobo Tiggre Gonzalez. And that may seem like not a big deal, but suddenly this shows up on legal documents, and now the electric company has Lobo Tiggre Gonzalez on my bills and things, so I need to show up for a driver's license with a bill to show that I live there, and now it's got a name that I don't want on my driver's license. It's complicated. It's a bit of a strange place, okay? So it is different. It's not expatriation. You are still part of the United States, here. So if you hate the beast in Washington, don't kid yourself. You're not getting away from the beast here, okay? It is not a way to hide from the taxman. The IRS will audit. My anticipation is I will be frequently invited to tea and cookies by the IRS to explain what I'm doing and what's going on. And that's okay. because what I'm doing is legal. That's fine. I say it's not Beverly Hills, the broken pavements and so on. It could be, but you have to come here and roll around in the dirt a bit and see if this is for you. Because the bottom line is, if you're uncomfortable living in a place that's maybe not as clean as the suburban Germany or West Palm Beach, Florida or something, you're not going to be comfortable here. It may not be worth it, no matter what the tax savings are. Because at the end of the day, you need to live here. You be happy here. It's not worth it if you're going to be miserable. And everybody in this room probably understands this, but the folks on the internet, I'm addressing you because who knows where you are and what circumstances you're used to. But these are things that are important to think of. I encourage everybody to come here and experience the place first before they make any decisions on what I'm about to tell you about the taxes. So, this is not for everyone, enough said. Act 20. This is the main one that can reduce your income tax. I will tell you, I'll jump to the punchline down here. I was a U.S. taxpayer. Well, you're never not a U.S. taxpayer. I guess I should explain that. Okay, let me start. For more than 100 years, Puerto Rico has had an exception. And that is that Puerto Rican-derived income is exempt from the U.S. federal income tax. It's not that there's no taxes here. It's not that there's no U.S. relationship. It's that Puerto Rican-derived income is exempt from the U.S. federal income tax. Now that never mattered before because this place has a lot of socialism, there's a lot of welfare, there's a lot of things to pay for, and the tax rates here were just as bad. There was no reason to come here and make your income Puerto Rican. But when they went bankrupt and they had no choice, they came up with these incentive programs. So if you set up one of these incentivized companies, in the case of Act 20, you export services to the United States or elsewhere to non-Puerto Ricans, you can get a 4% corporate tax rate, or for certain cases you can get a 3% corporate tax rate. Now you still have to pay yourself a reasonable wage for whatever it is the work that you're doing, your consultancy or whatever, but you can then pay yourself your profits from your company that you set up and pay the lower corporate tax. So it's not free, it's not tax-free, but as long as that income is Puerto Rican-derived income, you can get this lower tax rate. In my case, it resulted in a change from 2013 to 2014 of approximately 60% income tax reduction. And I was living in Washington State, which has no state income tax. So if I was in New York or California, the savings would have been even larger. Now, again, this is real. This really happened. You can read about this. I'm standing here telling you this was my experience. The idea of the act was to create jobs, create new prosperity, new investment in Puerto Rico. So again, this is real. It's not a tax dodge. You can't just come down here and set up a corporation and then go back to where you were and say, oh yeah, okay, I'm a Puerto Rican now. I've got a business thing. No, you really need to live here. And you need to convince the government here that you are doing good, that you're spending money here, that you're helping them achieve their goals. They will review your status every year. And if you're not helping, if your business here isn't contributing positively, you can lose your status. So again, this is the real thing. This is not a dodge. This is not you pay some guy in a back alley a couple $100 and you get a paper that gets you out of jail free or tax jail free. So you have to comply. You are complying with rules. And as an anarchist, it is painful for me to say this. I'm voluntarily complying with this tax regime. But the bottom line is huge. And it's not easy. When you set up a company, you as an individual do not apply for an Act 20 grant. You set up a company in Puerto Rico that does one of the encouraged businesses, and that company gets a decree from the government of Puerto Rico. And so you have to incorporate. You have to go through all the expenses of hiring the lawyers and the accountants and incorporating your business here. So, not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. 4 years ago almost, when we started, it cost me $30,000 to do this. Nowadays it might be more. They keep adding and tweaking the rules and so on. So, this isn't a tax dodge, it's the real thing, but if you qualify, the savings are phenomenal. Simple enough? Okay, there's good news here. It's not just for companies. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. There are lots of ways to do this. There are lots of things that may qualify. There are lots of ways of looking at this. So you may think, well, I'm just an individual. I don't need to have a company. But you can incorporate, and you can set up a company that does things. As a writer, I was an employee of my company, Casey Research, before I moved here. I moved here and I set up a company that would export writing services to Casey Research in the United States. That's not made up. That's right. And I'm no longer employed. They fill out 1099s for me. I came here and I exported my services as a writer. And there's a lot of things that people do, individuals do, that could qualify for this. Consultants and programmers. There are a lot of people who could export their services, which Act 20 is geared towards. So don't think that this is just for somebody who owns, an aircraft maintenance company or some bricks and mortar kind of business. Lots of ways we can get creative and do this. But there is also the individual-oriented Act 22. And that is, basically they want to encourage people with deep pockets to move here. They understand that you do good for the economy just because of the kind of person you are. Act 22 is a 100% capital gains tax holiday until 2036. So the clock is ticking on this. The later you move here, the shorter that capital gains tax holiday will be. But this means you pay no taxes on any of your capital gains, short-term or long-term. Let me repeat that again. 0 taxes on capital gains. So if I invest in stocks and they go up and I sell them, I pay no taxes on that. That's based on my residence, even if the stocks are U.S. companies. Now let me go to that. If the U.S. company pays me a dividend, however, that's U.S. income. It's not Puerto Rican income. So I would have to pay U.S. income taxes on that. When I first heard about this, I was so excited. My goal was to move here and never have to file a 1040 again. I was going to be a Puerto Rican taxpayer and never have to file a 1040. Turns out, it doesn't work that way. You're still a U.S. citizen, and if I go to Ghana or Guyana to look at an investment opportunity for my work, I am not in Puerto Rico, and I'm working. So that's U.S. derived income. So guess what? I have to pay U.S. taxes every time I go somewhere, even if it's the United States, for work. So I have to portion my time from the year. How much of my time was I working in Puerto Rico at my desk, and how much of my time was I going somewhere else? Even if it wasn't the United States, it counts as U.S. income. So there's ins and outs. You do need to be careful. But it's very real, and my capital gains, though, that's residency-based. It doesn't matter how much time I spend in or out of Puerto Rico. So if I invested here and I have any kind of capital gain, to me this is huge. I am an investor, and what I write about is investing. When I travel the world, I'm looking for investments. So to be able to get a 0 capital gains tax. And for this, you don't have to set up a company. Any individual can do this as long as you meet the minimum requirements. Now those minimum requirements, they keep changing. It used to be almost nothing. And then I guess somebody decided we're letting the riffraff in, we need to notch things up. The fees keep going up a little bit. There's a $5,000 fee now when you're filing for this. And there's also a new rule that you need to make a charitable contribution here in Puerto Rico of $5,000. Which, and maybe if I'm working at Walmart, that's not going to help me very much. But if I have any capital at all, and if I invest, even as a retiree, if I have a portfolio and I'm investing, this is very significant. And the tax saving can way more than pay for this. So don't think that if I'm not, Warren Buffett, that this is of no interest. Anybody who's an active investor can make huge investments from here. But again, this is a real deal. It's not a dodge. You can't just come in here and set up some paper dummy corporation that's going to give you these benefits. You need to live here. And if you're spending a lot of time in the United States, the IRS will go through your travel records, and they'll invite you in for tea and cookies, and please explain to us, how much time you spent in the United States, and why should we consider you a real Puerto Rican and exempt from U.S. federal income tax if you spend, 6 months in the United States and 2 months in Puerto Rico and other months elsewhere. So this is not a dodge. You need to take it seriously, but if you do, it really works. Now I've heard people getting creative with this too, and it'll be interesting to see as the audits begin exactly how far this goes. But I met a guy who came here, filed for Act 22. He's a programmer, and he said, I'm not selling my services, I am creating capital goods in my programs, and I am selling those goods at a gain. So I'm not going to even pay the 4% tax, I'm going to pay 0% tax on the capital gain on my products. I suspect the IRS will probably invite him in for tea and cookies. But it's an argument, and it's something that people are trying. I would actually discourage people from getting too creative, because we really don't want the IRS to sort of saying, oh, well, this whole thing is bad, let's shut everything down. I'm not sure they could. This relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States Congress goes back more than 100 years. So they couldn't do it by regulatory fiat. They would actually have to go to Congress to get the situation changed. Meanwhile, these decrees, I have a contract with the government of Puerto Rico. My tax-exempt status for these capital gains is not just a little box I check in a form. I have a contract with the government of Puerto Rico detailing all my capital gains exemptions through 2036. And I suppose that if somebody got a new contract today, it'd probably be a little bit different. They keep twiddling this. So if you're thinking about it, I highly encourage everybody to come down here, explore Puerto Rico, taste Puerto Rico, smell it, roll around in it, see if you can deal with it, see if you can thrive in it. Personally, I love it. My wife is a Northern European, and for her, the warm weather and the coconuts and the iguanas are just fantastic. For me, it's mostly the taxes. But we like it here. We're happy here. So try it out. And if you find that this is something that's of interest to you, this is a very real way for at least U.S. persons to reduce their taxes. On that note, I should say if you're not from the U.S., you have an advantage, because every other country in the world, besides Eritrea and the U.S. are the only two countries in the world that will tax their citizens wherever in the world they live. Right? If you're Canadian and you don't live in Canada and you don't use Canadian services, you fill out some forms and things, you don't pay the Canadian tax, you're not there. But the U.S. will tax you after a certain exemption wherever you live, whether you use U.S. government services or not, except here in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. But they had a program like this and they kind of buggered it, so that's sort of a thing of the past. But Act 22 and Act 20, very real. Savings can be huge for U.S. persons. And, okay, they're best for U.S. persons because it's nowhere else that the U.S. person can get away from the long arm of the IRS. But they're still of interest, I think, to people from other countries, because if you come here and you set up a qualified business under Act 20, it's still a pretty low tax regime. It's better than the 15% flat tax that we heard mentioned before. There are other versions. There's Act 73 and 273. If you're in the financial services business, 273 is a separate form where you're not really exporting services, but your clients are outside of Puerto Rico. And that can be another vehicle to do this. So all of this stuff is available to the public. And again, my message is that it is very real. There are other benefits to Puerto Rico too. I don't know if you know this, but Puerto Ricans are exempt from Obamacare. Not being a primarily U.S. taxpayer can open doors. There are many places where you're really, if you carry a U.S. passport, you're not welcome anymore. You know, Switzerland isn't what Switzerland used to be, but Puerto Ricans are different. And I had a brokerage account in Canada. And I had to sort of go through the back door because U.S. persons, it's very complicated. Nobody wants to deal with the IRS. But when I became a Puerto Rican, they said, oh, you're no longer primarily a U.S. taxpayer. You can come in the front door. And what that meant in practical terms, I'm speaking metaphorically, what it meant though was a simplification and what I could participate in. You know, Canadian private placements and things. Everything became vastly simpler because they no longer saw me as a U.S. taxpayer. It's that foreign in a domestic sort of way thing. It's very weird. This is the only place on earth that's like that. Puerto Rican boards are exempt from inheritance tax. That was something I didn't know that I discovered. Cheaper than Miami if you like beachfront property and so on. I estimate that the condo I bought overlooking the beach would have cost me easily 3 times as much in Miami. The Jones Act has been mentioned, the boats and all this stuff. Yes, things are more expensive here, but the place still is in economic difficulty. So big ticket items like houses, those are still pretty cheap. But oddly enough, the Mercedes-Benz dealer tells me they're having a banner year. So I guess these Act 20 and 22 are working. And there's a speculative opportunity here too. I think real estate is still pretty near bottom, but if the island turns around, or if these Act 2022 laws really work and bring more deep-pocketed people here, I think there's a speculative opportunity on a real estate rebound. And there are many, many business opportunities. No offense to my dear Puerto Rican friends here and elsewhere, but this is a Latin American country that has its own mañana kind of business ethic. I think one can do very well here in business simply by being efficient and competent. That may sound insulting, but you call somebody, you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars for some repair on your condo or whatever, and they don't even bother calling back. It's like, how can you stay in business? You don't even bother calling your customers back. So if you're a young entrepreneur or an older one, if you're an entrepreneur, I think there are business opportunities here. All you have to do is come here and don't suck. That's a technical business term. And you'll do really well. And there's even a startup accelerator for people that want to come and create new businesses. I'm not going to vouch for these people. I don't know who they are or what their deal is. I saw the story in the paper just before I came here. Parallel18.com is the website, but they apparently are encouraging young entrepreneurs to set up new businesses in Puerto Rico. And if the bar is don't suck and you'll do well, maybe that could be interesting. And if you could do that in an Act 20 context, so much the better. Very interesting things. As difficult as things have been for Puerto Rico, there are signs of potential here. So I encourage everybody to look into all this stuff. More benefits. A lot of us are hardcore libertarians and we see the coming financial apocalypse. Well, if civilization as we know it ends, you won't freeze here. If terrorists decide they're going to attack the United States again, they might take New York or Chicago or LA or something. Most people don't even remember Puerto Rico's part of the United States. We're so far off the radar, I feel very safe. I could put a target on the top of my building, they never hit it. I think Puerto Rico is a place that's small enough that some people like Joe and others, committed people who work hard, I think we can make a difference here. And the more people like us come here, sort of a free state project kind of concept, I think this could become the city on the hill. Always want to learn Spanish.